Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Teachers Talk podcast, hosted by me, Alex. But I also go by Jeff, as that's what my professional counterparts know me as, so that's what I'll be going by in this video. Today, I'm joined again by my friends and colleagues from York University, Alex and David. Say hi, guys.
Hello.
Hey
How are you
everyone.
guys doing?
Perfect. And yeah, we recently finished our first year of Teachers College. So I think this is a really great time to reflect on the type of assessments we saw and how that differs from maybe previous university experiences that we've had. So yeah, it's really just a time to talk about that and let people know what they can expect from Teachers College if they're going to be going into it. So with that said, how did you both feel about the assessments that were used in Teachers College, and what were sort of the most common ones that you saw?
Again, the online situation is not ideal, so we kind of have to navigate a day-by-day basis. So it was pretty much what you expected in terms of the field that we're entering, as well as the online situation. The most common type of assessment I saw were like reflections, because the field that we're in, you know, everything's kind of like a day-by-day basis. You can plan and you can plan some more, but something's always going to go wrong. And reflecting on what goes right and what doesn't go right is a huge skill that I've been able to develop much better
Yeah.
over the last several months compared to before coming into Teachers College. So I'd say reflections and presentations are probably the most common thing I've encountered, because those are two very important components of our field and of our future job. But the most, I'll say, what the one, like in a type of assessment that I really liked, were portfolios. And because portfolios, when you're applying for a job eventually, and after a couple of years, maybe if you do a master's before or not, but when you're applying for a job, having a portfolio to kind of showcase what you've learned, to have, if you've made a website, if you've made a YouTube channel, if you've made X, Y, or Z, that's something you can showcase to a potential employer. And so while I think that reflections were kind of the most common, reflections are the most common type of assessment that I encountered, I'd say portfolios were the most important uh, type of reflection I encountered.
So I'm going to go a different way with the type of assessment that I want to talk about. I would say I saw a lot of video production and podcasts, basically to reflect on themes within the course and how I can relate it to future practice. So when it came to video production, I've definitely made a science demonstration. I recently did a lesson plan analysis, and I also did a podcast on popular culture and how it relates to our social world. So I think these are important skills for an online learning environment and remote learning, just because they help, I guess, demonstrate, I guess, certain skills you can use in future workplaces and in my future teaching practice, which can be very helpful with it sure looks like online and remote learning is here to stay. So being able to produce videos for my students that can help them become engaged in the material, I think will be very helpful. And then alongside the video production and podcasts, there was always a peer feedback component. So we'd be watching our peers and giving them constructive feedback, which I think is definitely important as well, just because of you're always going to be giving feedback to your students. And it's so important for their educational development and your own professional development.
Yeah, and I think you both sort of touched on the most common ones. I think reflections, I mean, they were in every single class, and most courses were actually graded by a weekly reflection, and that was pretty much everything you had to do. And then, yeah, there were some classes that were completely like, create this video, create this infographic. They were sort of like those product creation type of finals that forced you to learn a little bit about something, reflect on it, talk about that, and then sort of come up with like an action moving forward. Definitely, like, there were a couple classes that were all about like video production and being creative. But I think the one that I'm going to talk about, which is sort of similar, but I will talk about something different just so I don't repeat what everyone said, it's presentations. I want to say for about half of my classes there was some form of final presentation involved, and that could have been responding to an interview question in 5 minutes, which would look something along the lines of like, okay, you get your question, you regurgitate a few facts and informations and important pieces, and then you sort of talk about how you're going to put that into your practice and make it really practical. Other times it would be one of the first videos that went up on my channel was actually the science demonstration where I demonstrated the light bulb in the microwave and all the cool things that happen with that.
So
Um,
much fun to watch.
yeah, like that was actually
That was a
so
lot of
fun to
fun.
make as
That
well.
was a lot of fun. That whole project was really fun.
Yeah, so like I think that type of presentation was fun. I think again, any of those presentations are very practical. It's about what you're going to be doing when you're teaching. It's going to be, are you intentionally saying what you mean to say? Are you leaving any vague statements or spaces where students could be confused? And then I think you look back on that, reflect on it, and find out how you can do better. And I do think that was one of the things in with that assignment, the one that I was talking about with the light bulb and the microwave. A big piece of that was a reflection piece. So it's like, how do you think you did? What do you think you can improve on after watching yourself again? So, you know, everything always comes back to reflections, I guess. And I thought they were okay, you know. And I was actually just about to spoil the next question, which is how did the assessments that we just sort of explained, the reflections, the product creation, and the presentations, how did those compare to what you saw in your undergrads or your high school experiences?
So being the youngest in this group of fine gentlemen, you know, my high school experience was only 6 years ago. And being, you know, the three of us are going to be high school teachers very soon. And so it's kind of weird now analyzing my own high school experience from a different perspective. But a lot of it was it was on the role of the teacher. So the teacher would make sure that the student hands it in. They would check in with students on a daily basis. And then as you kind of get older into university and then professional school or graduate or whatever, it becomes more independent. So that's kind of like a general pattern that I've noticed. Compared to my undergrad, though, my undergrad was in a science related discipline. And so different types of assessments and analysis. Like you have in-person labs, you have more tests, you had a handful of essays, I guess, but and you know, in teachers college, a lot more of it is like opinion based, which is fine, it's good, but that was something that I kind of not necessarily struggled with, but that was something that was very new to me. I wasn't used to sharing my opinion through my undergrad because it was like, okay, you know, if I'm looking at, I don't know, bacterial growth or something else, okay, it multiplied by this factor and it's that. It's not my opinion that it multiplied 20 by a factor of 2 in 5 days,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and so having a lot more opinion based stuff and having a lot more reflection, I feel, is something that I've noticed more at our time in New York because my undergrad was a lot more fast paced. It was also in person. I had 5 classes going that were all, you know, required a lot of time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I didn't really, not that this wasn't time consuming, but it was time consuming in a different manner. Um, you know, so I didn't really have time for like critical reflection of my work. And so that's one thing that I'm appreciative of so far here, is that I actually have time to reflect and review what I said, what I didn't say, what I should have said differently, and so on.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just want to touch on um, the engineering background, I guess, that I had, where we had a lot of labs, a lot of assignments, solving math-based questions. It's very different from the education experience that I have right now. Just doing a lot of reflection, as Alex said, and just kind of diving deeper into how it supports my future practice. I think I've actually rewrote a lot of my reflections just because I don't have that experience that some other students have writing papers and essays and discussion posts, which I found a little bit difficult at the beginning, but I've kind of gotten into uh, working that out now. But it's just very different, and it's had me actually thinking about how I will approach high school education, because when I was in high school, I felt very disconnected from science a lot of the time with the worksheets in every class. Almost every day we had worksheets. And now I'm kind of wondering how I can make the education meaningful where students are really reflecting on how it affects their lives. And a big course that I took recently was on sustainable education and how the environment is like should be our priority and how we should really be using nature as a resource and or the earth as a teacher to our students.
Yeah. And I think I'll probably echo something similar to you. I mean, David, you and I went through high school pretty much around the same time. Um, so like my experiences will be a little similar, but like in high school in science and in math, obviously, it was very worksheet heavy, very test heavy. Yeah, like it was unit tests and that was about it. Maybe there was an odd project here and there, but you had lab reports. Those were sort of your projects. But everything was very, knowledge focused, which is fine. I didn't really have too much of an issue with that. I've always tested well. Uh, yeah. But I think also what I've seen in Teachers College has been more similar to what I went through because back in the day, back in high school and stuff, like my strongest subject actually wasn't science or math. It was actually business. I pretty much got like straight hundreds going through high school in all those courses. And a lot of those were like business presentation and business pitches and stuff. And I found a lot of the presentations and video creation that we've had to do was similar to that, except now there's 9 years of technology difference. Back then it was like Prezi was just becoming a thing. So like you were lucky if you got to use Prezi or knew how to use it. It just used to be a PowerPoint presentation that you used to record and try to animate some cool things in different ways like that. And then obviously, like I used to be a drama kid. I used to do all the school plays and everything, was the lead role in a couple of them. So what ends up happening is like, as we sort of get into the reflection and presentation pieces and portfolios, I've sort of done pieces of that before. But that was in high school. When we hit university and like our science program, like, I mean, I was in biochemistry and biotechnology and, I did some biophysics work. That was all just midterms and finals and lab reports. That was the whole program, like 7 courses at a time, plus a couple labs, just rinse and repeat term after term. And then when I got to my master's, obviously your research master's, your assessment is a thesis, which is just straight objective data. It's not subjective, right? So just sort of like what Alex was touching on, very much like analysis and, that scientific language and stuff. And then the courses were all either presentations or again, like an analysis piece. So it's just very different from what I've seen, which is fine. But I do agree with you. Like, I think after seeing what I've done in Teachers College, I find I'm reflecting more on like what I want my students to do, how I want them to learn, and like how I'm teaching. I'm very much reflecting on that almost every single day, which I think is just a stark contrast to what I was doing before. And I guess part of that comes back to the fact that I haven't written an essay in 9 years, So like when you got a class or like a reflection piece due and like you're trying to figure it out, it's like, oh, this is the worst.
How do I write this? It's been a decade since I've done this.
But then like once you figure it out, you're like, oh, this is easy. I can rip through a reflection now in an hour at most.
Exactly.
But yeah, I guess my last question would be, is there anything you wished was different about the assessments that we saw in Teachers College? Or what advice would you give for students preparing for Teachers College, sort of preparing for those reflection pieces and stuff, if they're coming from a more objective background, focusing on data and analysis?
So I'll take the advice side of it.
Cool.
Coming from, say, again, we all come from some sort of science or engineering, mathematics based backgrounds, so we're used to more objective analysis and stuff like that. But one piece of advice I would give to anyone who wants to go into Teachers College, regardless of what their teachable is read. Read as many books about as many things as you possibly can, because teachers, we're going to be role models to our students. Potentially, we're going to be not necessarily in the public, but we'll be like community figures. You'll be the teacher. You could potentially have, if you teach 3 classes of 30 kids, you could have like 100 students. That's 100 families within your community that you're now a part of their lives at some point. And so, making sure that you're as well versed and as well read and as eloquent as possible in as many aspects of your life as you possibly can be, because there is so much writing, because there is so much opinion-based stuff. You want to make sure that you know how to artfully navigate the assignments. You want to say, how much do I write about this? How much do I focus on this? Do I want my language to be a little bit simpler? Do I want to use, this type of language for this assignment versus this assignment. And so that's one big piece of advice I would give. It's kind of like far left field or far right field, whatever, baseball people say. It's kind of outfield, but that's one advice I'd give to students. Apart from, any sort of community involvement, read,
Yeah.
improve your vocabulary, improve your diction, improve your ability to navigate situations, reflect on what you read, and so on. So that would be kind of if I could put in one word, I'd say read more.
Yeah, and I just want to jump in here really quick. By the conversation about read more, it doesn't necessarily need to be, nonfiction pieces or history pieces.
Absolutely.
Something that David and I were talking about off the air was one of the assignments that we had for our diversity class, which was reading a children's book. I think mine was like 8 pages long. It was called Scientist, Scientist, Who Do You See? And each of those books sort of tackled a different social issue from the point of a kid. And it was just sort of to reflect on, what are you seeing? How do you think it applies to your classroom? It doesn't necessarily need to be like these big, long,
No,
nonfiction pieces.
Absolutely. And like that, like obviously while nonfiction helps, and that's maybe just kind of like a personal thing, being in science, but anything, read fantasy, read action, read adventure, read comedy books, anything that just in general improves your vocabulary and your ability to communicate verbally, orally, and through written manners. But that's kind of what the main focal point was. Thank you for that.
Yeah, so I definitely agree with the read when it comes to advice for students going into teachers college, but I'd like to approach this question just what I'd like to see different about assessment in teachers college. And I've definitely echoed this idea throughout many of my courses, and I've definitely talked to Jeff and possibly Alex about this as well. But I would have liked to have seen more experience with lesson planning and how we
Absolutely.
can really address curriculum expectations, because I can
100%.
count on one hand how many lesson plans I've made my entire first year, barring the obvious circumstances where there was no practicum this year and it
Yeah.
was postponed. But I think it would have been helpful to really break down the curriculum and approach learning to teach from that perspective alongside the student-centered pedagogy and other significant themes in the teaching program. It's just not really having any experience looking at it and then being asked to go into a classroom is going to be quite difficult in my final year next year.
Yeah, and I think that you've actually hit the nail on the head with that one. I do think that there is a disconnect between what you learn in teachers college and what you put into place in a practicum. Um, I've noticed that, reflections are great, and I love the reflections now, but they're often not very practical. It's like, how did this make you feel? And, as much as I'm attending teachers college to, you know, learn how to better address the diversity in my classroom, and just be a better teacher in general and be more social justice focused. I think another big piece of it is I'm attending teachers college to get practical experience, to
Absolutely.
practical lesson planning, and learn how to be a better teacher
Absolutely.
while learning teaching related, things, like lesson planning and unit planning and all the administrative work you have to do. And I think that's really my only big knock against first year, is the fact that it is very, and how did this make you feel, focused. It was more about confronting your biases than it was actually, and that's not bad. I'm going to say that's not bad. That's good. But there was an overwhelming amount of that compared to how do I use this in the classroom?
Absolutely.
And there was only a couple classes that actually addressed, like, hey, how do you use this technology in the classroom? What does it mean to use this type of assessment in the classroom? And like, what might you actually do with students? As you said, I can count on one hand the amount of times I was actually asked to either directly create an assignment or a lesson for students, or just sort of put that into practice, and do like a micro teaching thing. But I think I'm just going to tack on a little piece here. And it's sort of related to it. I found the assessments, again, were very reflection focused, and they were very subjective. And a lot of the times, the profs didn't really want to hear what you actually thought. they wanted to hear what they thought sort of spoken back to them.
Yeah.
There were a few times I got not great grades on a couple, and again, teachers college is not about the grades. It's about the learning that happens there. But it's very easy to look at your grades as an indication of performance and as an indication of, am I really understanding, for example, what student-centered pedagogy is if I got an 80 on something, whereas I've been getting 100 on everything else, let's just say. And sometimes profs wouldn't actually care about what your opinion was. They want to hear theirs sort of spoken back to them in a different way, maybe with like a couple different resources. And I just personally don't like that. I understand the need for subjectivity, but I do like, if you're going to be marking something or grading something subjective, then it should be a whole lot more of self-assessment than like a teacher assessing what I can, talk about. And I would like some more objective pieces in there. Some stuff like the lesson planning, I did find like everything was subjective. And I really want something that was like more similar to what I did in my undergrad, like how to actually mark a test, how to actually give feedback to students. Like what is the quality of the feedback you're giving to students? Now I understand that might be seen as subjective, but like I would say that's more of an objective piece. Because if you're bad at giving feedback, like you need someone to tell you.
Yeah, 100%.
But yeah, I think that's what I would say for like what I wish was different about assessment. But overall, like I think the school did a good job. I think that online learning messed a lot of things up. I think online learning is better for the program, but there's just an adjustment period that needs to happen. And I think that a lot of profs went down the reflection pathway because it was easy. They didn't need to mark as much. There wasn't as much tech that was needed. But I do hope that's different once the program sort of gets figured out, online versus in person. But yeah, I'm going to end the podcast there because we've been going for a little bit. But thank you, Alex and David, for popping on today. If you like this content and want to see more of it or see some of our other podcasts coming up in the future, please like and subscribe to the channel. It definitely goes a long way in helping us all out. And with that said, I guess all three of us are going to be signing off. So have a great day, everyone. Stay happy, safe, and healthy, and enjoy. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Take care, everyone.